Hi guys, welcome to another video. This time I will be talking about the Bastl Neo Trinity, which is a complex modulation source for Eurorack. Bastl kindly sent me this module to check out, but they're not sponsoring this video and they don't get to see it up front or anything like that. All opinions are my own. That being said, I wouldn't really be making this video if I didn't have a positive opinion about this module, because I don't really have time for that sort of thing. I really only make videos on stuff that I actually use in my music, and this definitely got a lot of views in my studio since it arrived here. The Neo Trinity has 6 outputs, meaning that you can have 6 channels independently of LFOs, envelopes or CV processing, and they run entirely independently of each other. A modulation source, what does that even mean in the context of modular? It means that it can modulate signals. What you would do in automation in the DAW, you would do with some sort of CV source on the modular that basically turns knobs for you periodically in an LFO, or it can also record knob turns, so it can literally turn knobs for you. It's quite interesting. When it arrived here and I looked at the manual for the first time, I was actually quite intimidated by this module because it can do so many different things. It can do LFOs and envelopes, it can record automation, and it can also generate triggers and record triggers to reset LFOs or to trigger envelopes. And it can also function as a sort of CV manipulation type thing, where you can attenuate signals or invert them, or it can also quantize, and yeah, it can do all sorts of different things. And it is a very elaborate module that can do more things than I could possibly cover in this video. So I have decided to focus on one aspect of this module first and show you the rest some other time. The way I use modulation in my music is usually in the form of LFOs. One of my favorite modules that I use in pretty much every patch, or used to use before this module arrived, is the intrusive. And that one is a relatively simple LFO source. It has 8 outputs of LFOs that are free running and not synced. They run at different speeds, and there's just one control, which is one rate knob that controls the speed of all of them. And then there is one CV input with which you can modulate the rate at which these LFOs run. So it's a very simple module, and that's something that I really like about that particular module. It's basically just triangle LFOs and that's it. It doesn't do anything else. It's very simple to use, and it's so convenient to have so many LFOs. You can patch it into everything and modulate things, and it just keeps things moving, and that's particularly interesting if you want to do generative type music. It's really quite nice because it keeps things unpredictable and interesting. And since there's also this option of self-modulating it, so plugging one of the LFOs into itself, it can create quite interesting shapes and patterns, and it's really quite cool. But we're talking about the Bastl Neo Trinity, right? Now I'm talking to you about a different module. Well, the reason why I'm talking about that particular module is because it is so simple to use. I wanted to see whether the Bastl Neo Trinity could fulfill the same function in my rack and be as easy to use, as straightforward to use, even though it has so many more possibilities and a much more fine-grained level of control than the Ocht has. Basically, I wanted to see whether I could replace the Ocht with the Neo Trinity and have it be an equally intuitive patching experience. Given that this module can produce many different wave shapes, it has several different inputs, meta in and separate ins for channel E and F. It's a bit of a different animal, and it has shift functions, and it can save its functions, and the manual is actually quite long, and of course when there are shift functions you have to remember them For me, it was important that these shift functions are not too unintuitive to use, because otherwise I would just gravitate to using the oct instead of this one, even though this one would give me more control. And the reason why this was important to me was because I actually have a module that can do similar things. It can create LFOs and also envelopes, but I do find it a bit tedious to use. It is the mutable peaks, and I have a clone called Peak. Even though it is a very cool module and it can do a lot of different things, it's one of those multifunction modules, I do get confused about what it does at times. I mix things up because there are 4 knobs, sometimes I use the wrong one, and most of the time when I'm just listening to a modulation on one of the parameters that is maybe a bit more obscure, I don't really know what's going on at times, because it can do things like wavefold sine waves in LFO shapes basically, and that's cool, but can I hear that at times when I have very strange parameters? No. So in the end I have to always use an oscilloscope with that one, and that tends to be annoying, so most of the time I just gravitate to the oct and then leave this in random walk type mode and plug that into the oct, and that is one of my staples basically. It's the simplest way of using that combination. Since I moved the peak and the oct into a small case for writing an album, I didn't have my favorite CV source in my big case anymore, so this was where the Neo Trinity went, and it basically replaced the oct and the peak and its function in the big case. And I wanted to see whether I could make music in the same style with my typical techniques and have it flow as freely as it would if I was using 2 modules that I'm already very used to. This is a bit of a, challenging test for a module that is so complex and can do so many different things. Does it remain usable and intuitive, or does it get too convoluted, and do you need an oscilloscope to know what's going on? That's basically the question that I wanted to answer with this video. The LFO section can produce 5 different waveforms: an ascending ramp, a descending ramp, a triangle, a square wave, and a random walk type thing, which is very useful. And you can smooth these functions too. There are 3 inputs, 2 separate inputs for channels E and F, and a meta in, and those can run in different modes. They can be attenuated, full, inverted, attenuated. There are different ways of using these signals, and these are hidden behind these LED combinations. So if the upper LEDs are lit, it's different than when the lower LEDs are lit, and that can be confusing, but it's easy to remember that if the first 2 lights are lit, it's always just a simple input that affects the rate knob, and with that it becomes very easy to predict what it's doing. If the lights are off, then it doesn't use the inputs. You don't really have to look up anything in the manual if you just want to use it in a simple way. To remember what it does is sometimes a little bit confusing. I definitely mixed my input modes up once or twice, so that's something that I just need to get used to at some point. Yeah, it's not that difficult, but you have to look at the manual at least once. It also has 6 banks where you can save settings, and that's very easy. You just press Shift and bank. That's super easy to remember. I don't necessarily remember how to save it to a different bank off the top of my head. I have to look that up in the manual, but this is enough already to be certain that I don't accidentally change things, basically. There is a certain amount of manual knowledge that you need at some point, but it's not too obtrusive, and all the easy functions are pretty straightforward once you have looked at the quick start guide once. This is actually a very simple patch that can already show you how much you can do with the Neo Trinity. It is just a single note played from the even VCO, and it then goes into the chopping kinky and the stereo ripples. And the chopping kinky and the stereo ripples are both modulated by the Neo Trinity, in this case with triangle LFOs. And these modulate the different parameters, and you get this nice movement in the stereo field, and it has a lot of movement and interest that you wouldn't have with just a single note normally. So just a simple patch with those few modules has already a lot of interest through all this modulation. What is being modulated is the FM inputs on the stereo ripples and also the CV1 of the chopping kinky. I didn't move any of the knobs, and this is really just coming from the Neo Trinity. I then recorded this tuned to different notes. It is B, D, and A, and this is basically the basis of this entire track. And the track itself has more stuff going on. I was playing around with the iOS Model D app on my MacBook, and that's this bell-like tone, and there are different instances of it, and also Ableton's operator in one of them. I just layer them with the same melody and with some follow actions, like I generally like to do. There's also Valhalla Supermassive on everything, and also an iOS Clouds port that I also wanted to try out on the MacBook. And of course there's also some delay on it and that sort of thing. And Pure Magnetic Fathoms, which is one of my favorite plugins anyway. And yeah, it is a hybrid approach, but lately I've been interested in layering drones into my tracks because they're very interesting and give a sort of cohesion that without them you wouldn't have normally. And this is a good way of doing it because you have lots of interest through all the modulation in the Neo Trinity. Here I have the Neo Trinity set up for a bit of self-modulation. Everything just runs in LFO mode. If you go through all the channels, it's all LFO, LFO, LFO. You can see it's all in LFO mode. I use nothing else, just the LFO mode. And I have 6 channels of LFOs going around the system. I have quite a few channels set to random LFO mode, which you can check if you press here Shift. You can see which of the waves it has basically. If we check now, channel A is smooth random, channel B is random but not smooth, because this is in charge of playing back samples, and it works better if it's not smoothed. And then we have C, which is a triangle wave, and then D, E, and F are all smooth random. The difference between them is that some of them are affected by the meta in and some of them aren't. The meta in comes through here, it comes from the third channel, which is the triangle LFO, and it goes into the meta in and affects several different channels. You can check whether it affects the channels by pressing Shift again, and this might seem a lot of a shift for you right now, but it's actually quite simple to understand. If you just press Shift, you can check here whether it's activated or not. If no light is here activated, then the meta in does not affect the channel. So channel A is affected by the meta in, which you can see by these activated lights here. And this is just the first simplest function, which affects the rate knob directly. So everything that comes in through the meta will affect the rate knob, just like that. And you can see this especially with one of those channels where it is activated here. You will see it will go slow at first, and then when the triangle LFO goes faster, it will start to fluctuate and go faster and select faster. Now it starts, went a bit faster, and like this you can vary the rate of how fast new values are generated in the random mode. I like to do that for a bit of unpredictability, and if you do that even with another random, then it's even more random. But I wanted it to be a bit more predictable, and that's why I use the triangle LFO for this. And I have this set up like this for channel E and channel F too, but they run at different rates obviously, so there is going to be different modulation. It's not always the same. Channel A is also like this, and they're all different, so 3 different random values basically that are changing at different speeds. It's quite interesting, and this makes the patch truly random and unpredictable, which I really like. So I'm just spreading different random values around the system. With my peak and Ocht combination, I can't really have that many random values, only 2, and I can't affect the rate of the random either, so this is a nice new extended functionality for me while using LFOs in the way that I normally use them already. For me, one of the most important things here was whether I could easily use it for the way I normally use LFOs. Basically, I can use the same techniques that I use with the Ocht, some self-modulation, and also affected not all channels, which is something that sometimes caused problems for me with the Ocht. In some cases, it just meant that it wasn't as flexible as it could be. The Neo Trinity is rather flexible in that respect, because you can change the wave shapes, and it also has all these ways of turning off the in, and channels E and F also have an additional input, which also helps. So you can even have different self-modulation going to different places. And yeah, there are many complex patching possibilities with this particular module. What I really like about this is how intuitive it is to use, even though it has so much functionality. We got it up and running without really using that much of the manual at first, to use the LFOs at least. And I only had to look up how to set up the inputs and how to turn them off again and that sort of thing. But it's relatively easy to do. And even with the shift functions though, they are really easy to use. So you always see what's going on. So the simple functions are relatively simple to use. Setting it up as an LFO in different shapes is super easy. And it's very intuitive, and I can use it in just the same way as I've been using the Ocht and the Peak. So what's my verdict? I think the Neo Trinity is an excellent module. It's very usable, very intuitive, and now the rain is coming down like crazy. I think the Neo Trinity is a very good module indeed. It remains extremely intuitive. I didn't really feel the need to look at the oscilloscope even once while I was using the LFOs on this, and I did look at them in the end, but I didn't have to do it for any of the patches that I made. I just felt my way around the module, and it was fine, because I could always check which waveform was active by using the shift button. And what I really like about this module is that there are 3 inputs, so I can have different inputs modulating the rate of the LFOs, and what's even better is that I can turn off the modulation from those inputs and only use them on one of the channels, for example. That's very, very useful. Whenever I self-modulated the Ocht, I had to use it on all channels, and that sometimes restricted things, especially when I had the LFOs running at a very high speed, and then it sort of became a bit of a problem basically. The flexibility of this module is really very nice. It also retains some of the more complex LFO functions that you would have in an LFO module that has just one LFO. For example, it has reset, and you can send in triggers and that sort of thing, which is very nice. And it also has an internal clock, which is even better. You can sync it too, if that's your type of thing. For me, it's not really necessary to sync anything, because I mostly make ambient and I like things to be free running, but it is there as an option, and that's very nice. And another thing that I really like is that you can see very well what's going on with each channel. You have an LED for each channel that shows you what's happening there, And you also have the bigger LED under the rate knob, which tells you what the active channel is doing. It's all very easy to see what's going on. I really like that I can change all the waveforms for all the different channels separately. It's very useful that you can have each channel running separately in different modes too. You can have one channel running envelopes, one channel running CV, one channel running LFOs. They're all independent, but you can still use the inputs and affect those. It's really quite interesting in that respect. You can do lots of complex things. So my verdict is it definitely is as intuitive as the Ocht. You can just set it very simply to triangles. You can set up the inputs very nicely too, and you can change what the input is doing and have different kinds of inputs, and it doesn't get confusing while you do it. So that's really cool. It basically does the same thing for me that the Ocht does. It is just as intuitive, even though it can do so many things. And that's really quite an achievement, I would say, from a user experience perspective. I didn't really expect it to be this intuitive to use. After I looked at the manual, I was quite confused and I thought that I would have trouble getting into this module. But in fact, learning the LFO section was really rather simple, and I was up and running pretty much instantly after just a quick look at how to save the settings to the banks and that sort of thing. For such a complex module that can do so many different things, it's surprisingly intuitive, and I think Bastl have done a great job at making this very complex module very easy to use. I still have much to explore with this module. I've really only started with the LFO section, and even there I haven't used all the functions. I haven't used the sync yet or many of the input modes. And there's still lots to explore with this module. It's really quite an interesting module, and I'm very glad that I have it in my arsenal now. I can now keep the Ocht and the Peak in my small case, and the big case has my Neo Trinity, and that's a very good combination. I've also used these three modules together, because you can never have too much modulation, I suppose, especially if you have many different elements. And that's also quite fun. When playing with two modules that have so many outputs and LFOs, it reminded me a little bit of playing with the Eurorack, where you can just have unlimited numbers of Ochts going around. So even if you have an Ocht already, I do think that Neo Trinity has so much more to offer that it is still worth a look. I think by now I have 18 LFOs in my case, which is a tad excessive. Do I have a problem? Am I addicted to LFOs? Maybe. Is it a real problem though? No. Thank you to Bastl for sending me this module. I enjoyed playing with it a lot, and there will be more such explorations coming with the envelopes and the CV processing. I hope this video was useful for you. If you enjoyed it, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel, so I would appreciate it. You can also support this channel on Ko-fi. There are different membership tiers where you can get early access to my videos or download the music. Your support really keeps the channel going and allows me to make these kinds of videos. In the future there will be more videos like this one. I already have other videos in the works. I will show you a deeper dive into the Ocht as well, and the Peak, and all the modules that you've seen in this video will get their own dedicated video where I talk about how I build some of them. So you can look forward to those types of videos happening in the very near future. So I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye!